Hello and welcome to the latest business of the business podcast. I am your co-host JP John Poz from the Two Man Power Trip. Of course, joining me is the financial wrestling genius himself, the Doctor Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, John. In a fortuitous occurrence, I'm always scanning the news to see some unique pieces and insights into the wrestling world. And I came across a wonderful article by Tom Leturgey on the Pittsburgh wrestling scene, and I copy and pasted it. I wasn't gonna read the whole thing. I was just gonna excerpt it a little bit, but then I was like, well, maybe Tom's available, and we're grateful that he was. So, welcome to the show, Tom.
Well, thank you very much. And before we go any further, thanks for getting my surname correct.
I thought I was going to mess it up, and you were going to correct me. I'm so glad I did.
So, Tom, how did you kind of, discover pro wrestling? Like, were you always a fan? Where did you grow up, and does that play a part in what you were a fan of?
It did. I'm from a little town. If you look at a map of Pennsylvania and you see Johnstown and you see Altoona, there's a little town in between called Portage, Cambria County. And we got cable in 83, 84, right around the time that Hulk Hogan hit the national scene. And I was a Hulkster from very early on. And became a fan of the NWA as well, and just about any wrestling that I could see on television through college and up to this day, really.
So when you kind of are growing up, if you will, discovering wrestling, it wasn't always on your radar, though, before that?
No. We lived in a little coal town. The WWF, I would later learn, WWWF would often come to Johnstown. And, my dad was a coal miner. We weren't very well off at the time. And, around the late 70s, early 80s, things went sideways. And I had never heard that wrestling was at the Johnstown War Memorial. My mother, somewhere along the line, I was a big superhero fan, and somewhere along the line, my mother realized that there was a wrestler named Andre the Giant, and that's who I really took to from the early days, but didn't know anything much about him because, we didn't have cable. We had 3 TV stations, and wrestling was never on any of it. And then when I went to college and had cable and met some people that were also wrestling fans, that's where it really took off. And that's where I met Bobby O, who later became the owner of the Keystone State Wrestling Alliance and brought me on as a ring announcer. And I did the best I could with that and writing for 20 years for Pittsburgh's premier professional wrestling organization.
So you kind of eventually fell in love with the business.
Oh yeah. It as soon as I found out about an opportunity to do something on the independent scene, I loved to do it.
When you're looking back, when you first started liking wrestling, what did you like about it? You know what I mean? Like what kind of caught your eye, or what led you to it?
Well, like I said, growing up as a superhero fan, Superman, Captain America, all that stuff, it was, real life superheroes. It was real life mythology. And that really played into what I liked. And also, I was a big sports fan as well. And it just all worlds seemed to come together. And that's what I've enjoyed doing for all this time.
Who were your sports team? I'm guessing Steelers. It's
really the Pirates. The Pirates were my team growing up. The '79 World Series, Willie Stargell, Omar Moreno, all those guys. And then, of course, the Steelers. My dad, to this very day, is a big Steelers fan. So we were a big Steelers fan family. And between baseball and football, we really didn't have any basketball other than I would watch on television Ralph Sampson with Virginia playing basketball before guys like Patrick Ewing, before guys like Michael Jordan. And I was a big fan of Dr. J, Julius Erving in basketball. Hockey, even though Johnstown to this day is a big hockey town, I never really took to hockey, but everything else I loved.
When you're looking at it, right? Who was your guys in wrestling outside of the Hulkster? Like when you're looking
Well,
at that?
it's funny because the Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson. I really liked Ricky Morton because, it's a cliche. He looked like me. He was a littler guy. I'm not the biggest guy in the room. And when I met Ricky Morton, he was just like an inch taller than me. So, it was really cool. Those guys, and of course, guys like the Road Warriors, and then many of the WWF guys after that. I was too young to be a big Bruno Sammartino fan, but I met Bruno afterwards, and Dominic DeNucci was a good friend and a great guy. And that's, I'm trying to think, AWA, things like that. Road Warriors, like I said, I was a big fan of the Road Warriors, and I just always loved the storytelling. Nikita Koloff, Magnum TA. I was a big Magnum TA fan, big fan of Sting early on, and a lot of those guys.
So not just a Northeast like WWF guy. It seems like you're spreading the wealth there with NWA and AWA too.
Yeah, because by the time I was in college and I went to college in '86, cable was starting to go all over the place. That's where you could see guys from the AWA, and of course syndicated TV shows. They had the NWA before 6:05 on Saturday nights. I got to see all of that. Met Ronnie Garvin, and a couple of years ago, I was really happy for Ronnie when he won the championship off of Ric Flair on my 20th birthday, September 25th, 1987. And I told him that, and he goes, "Well, you remember that?" And I go, "It's my 20th birthday." So, it's always loved those guys.
Bruno, huge, Pittsburgh star, right? You weren't growing up, obviously. You weren't a big Bruno guy then.
Well, I was too young, the studio wrestling, which was a large demographic to this very day, calls professional wrestling studio wrestling. It was on the television here on what was then WIIC, Channel 11 in Pittsburgh, now WPXI. Channel 11 in Pittsburgh from 1958 to 1974, the last year or two on a Fox station. I was 7 by the time it went off the air. So, and I lived in a different market. So I never really got to see studio wrestling.
When you're looking at getting into the business, is that something you ever kind of foresaw? Like, oh, I'm never going to do wrestling or get in the business? Or is it something you're like, maybe I will get into this?
Especially in college, I had no idea that there was something called independent wrestling. My friend Lord Zoltan called it outlaw wrestling back in the day. These independents before there were independents. I never realized that was such a thing until I really met my friend Bobby O in Pittsburgh, was involved with the KSWA in the early days and invited me to be a ring announcer somewhere along the line. And from the year 2000 until our very last show just a couple of weeks ago on December 6th, the KSWA was Pittsburgh's independent pro wrestling show. We were in the city limits and in and around Pittsburgh for 25 years, more than 400 events.
I'm going to hand it over to Lavie. Talk about the state of the Pittsburgh wrestling scene.
Yeah, first I sort of want to set the scene a little bit, because as a New Yorker, John's in New Jersey, probably better at geography than me. But like generally when I think about Pennsylvania, it felt like sort of very Northeast in the sense of that it's like an extension of New York, New Jersey. But Pittsburgh, I've come to learn, is somewhat different. My wife is from, actually, she grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia. So she would talk about going to Pittsburgh, and it sort of like reframe my thinking, sort of like, this isn't exactly like metropolitan New York City. It's sort of a mix of that. So like, how does that play into the type of wrestling that takes place and the type of workers that pass through Pittsburgh?
Well, the good news is we are in a geographic location where guys and gals come from all over the place. Like there's some from Ohio, West Virginia. Sometimes they come from New York. I was on a couple of shows. It wasn't our show, but I was ring announcing another event, and they came from Canada. A couple people came from Canada. I knew some people that came up from Maryland, that sort of thing. Most of the traveling talent that I'm aware of, all came from the East Coast and a little bit into some of the Midwest. But Pittsburgh is really cool. I always say New Jersey can have Philadelphia. It's that far away from us. There's so many cities that are closer to Pittsburgh than Philadelphia. So when I've done my research over the years, I haven't really seen a Philadelphia promotion that did a lot of the community events and things that the KSWA and some of the other promotions in the area have done. But yeah, the KSWA was different than everybody else. And, but we had a lot, and we kind of were like the studio wrestling guys, where we had our core group of wrestlers, and some guys would come in and out. But yeah, it's mostly a Eastern promotion throughout Western Pennsylvania and beyond.
So I first became aware of the Pittsburgh independent wrestling scene through, of course, the After mags. And the favorite of the mags, the most mentioned person, was T-Rantula.
T-Rantula.
So was he a KSW regular? I think he owned a promotion. What was his positioning?
He did. He was an owner of Far North Wrestling. They ran some shows up in Butler County, which is north of Pittsburgh, and they used to do some things in the South Side as well. He did wrestle with us for a couple of years, beginning in 2016, and he had his last match at a we used to have the Brawl Under the Bridge in Homestead. We didn't do it this year, but he had his final match under the bridge this year. Yeah, so T-Rantula, who always said that The Rock was one of his first opponents. Yeah, he wrestled with us. Lord Zoltan, who was a regular as Ken Jugan in 1983-84 with the WWF house shows in Hamburg and that sort of thing. He was there as well. And throughout the years, we've had other guys on the independent scene that have been veterans of the independent scene have wrestled with us.
I think one of Demolition Axe's last matches was with KSWA. I remember being especially notable, just kind of seeing him on the scene. And it was probably an article that you wrote that.
Yeah, it was. Bill Eady was a friend of, and it still is a friend of one of our wrestlers, Sean Blanchard. And when he was going to call it quits, we decided that his last singles match was against Sean Blanchard at a Brawl Under the Bridge several years ago, and it was really cool. He received a proclamation from the state as well as the city, because he really got started in the Pittsburgh region. He was originally from a small town about an hour south of Pittsburgh. And for the longest time, his dad was still with us, and he would travel frequently from Atlanta to visit his dad.
One of the more recent highlights on the Pittsburgh scene, I think, are the D'Angelo boys. Dominic D'Angelo, a friend of the show. So any thoughts on him? And feel free to cut a promo on him. We'll be sure to share it.
Before we go into Dominic, you mentioned a good friend of mine, Bill Apter, who was inducted into the KSWA Hall of Fame in 2017. Bill After is a great friend, and he is supposed to come to a show here in the spring, and I hope to meet up with him. One of the greatest guys to ever be involved in pro wrestling. Dominic D'Angelo, I don't know if I've ever met his brother. I know his brother has done some wrestling, and they look almost identical. So I may have seen his brother and thought it was Dominic. I don't know. But Dominic used to come to our shows as a fan with some other friends. But then he was able to get involved. He, like me, he's a writer for some online wrestling organizations, and that really kind of took him away from being ringside at KSWA shows. But he is a friend of mine, and I couldn't cut a promo. A babyface versus a babyface. I don't know if I could cut that kind of promo.
We were hoping you would turn him heel. So, one of the things that we've actually been exploring the last few weeks is it's sort of like in the zeitgeist is the decline of or perceived decline of independent pro wrestling, with different promoters pushing back on that and so on. So we've talked to, of course, Game Changer Wrestling, Brett Lauderdale, Jersey Championship Wrestling, and so on. Do you see a decline in popularity in Pittsburgh wrestling? Does that have anything to do with this promotion closing up shop recently?
What's happened in recent years is there has been a glut of promotions either running shows against some of the established wrestling organizations. There is, at one time, the Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission was a strong athletic commission, and they would periodically come to shows and enforce the rules of the athletic association. And in recent years, there has been a change in that, which has allowed a lot of people that maybe just found themselves with a wrestling ring, and hey, we're going to put this ring up and have shows. And that is kind of, it's a little different than the established organizations like KSWA, IWC, which is in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania. As next year, it becomes the longest running professional wrestling organization in Western Pennsylvania, an outstanding organization. There's RISE, there's RWA, Renegade Wrestling Alliance in West Newton, and the Uniontown Rise is in Uniontown. Those are some of the promotions that have been running regular shows for upwards of 2 decades. I know Rise, I think, is going to have their 10th anniversary next year. RWA is between 10 and 20 years old. Those guys have been around for a long time as well. There are spot shows. We had a spot show. Al Snow's organization, Ohio Valley Wrestling, was supposed to have an event in Western Pennsylvania. I don't think that it ever went through. So there is such a glut of promotions out there trying to run shows and do shows. Had we had sellouts everywhere we gone for the last 2 years? No. There are many. Another thing, we don't have groups from Rise, Uniontown, which is an hour south of us. They didn't, we didn't share fans, but if somebody was on the border of going one place or another, they would go to one that was geographically closer to them. So, I think that with as many shows as there have been, and television wrestling, you can stay home and watch TV wrestling. My wife tells me you could find that every day. If you stay home, you can find it on TV. You can find it streaming in different ways. Of course, we had our big blockbuster show, but we ran there were times we ran 25 events a year. Were we going to have 500 people at 25 events a year? No, sadly not. But I don't know anybody that does.
Yeah, I think if there is, a continued decline, I think it will hurt, the pro wrestling business, overall. I think that's a place where people, discover their fandom. For example, actually, it is basically 1 year ago. I was allowed, because he was 10, so maybe he wouldn't copy things, to go to the WWE Holiday Show in Madison Square Garden. It was quite expensive, so we had the cheap seats, and he's kind of like, okay, thanks, Dad. That was fine. Kind of like whatever. And then we went to a tiny show in a VFW, and even though smoking is outlawed in New York State, no one's going to bother the veterans, and it's tight 3 rows, and a wrestler threw like candy into the crowd. And then when my son realized you're allowed to like throw it back, like, and yell at people, and when he was just like in love, and that was just like so transformative for him. And we're going to the AEW show in the Hammerstein Ballroom this Saturday as his 3rd show, and I'm curious to see like what that balance is. But all that is to say that I think the infrastructure of independent wrestling is so important for building fan affinity. What do you think about that?
It does. You brought up a lot of good points, because especially your WWE tickets, they're astronomical now. Take a look at their business model. They're getting that money too. People are spending. People that can't afford it are spending $300 to be in the 3rd row of a WWE event, and sometimes they refuse to go to an indie show. It is, I call it being a fan of TV wrestling as opposed to true wrestling, because if you're a true fan of wrestling, you're going to check it out in your neighborhood. Town like Pittsburgh, where you can go to a show within a half an hour from practically anywhere you are. And then once you do get those people in, they always tell it's special because they have access to the wrestlers, and like you said, they can hurl insults, heckle the wrestlers, and sometimes you can get their attention, and oftentimes get their attention. So that was one of the things that we had in the KSWA, was a great fan base that never bought any of the garbage. If you had we had storylines, we were very storyline based. And if somebody did something that was against this, what they were expecting, sometimes they would accept it, sometimes they wouldn't. That is a very loyal fan base and a very smart fan base. And we were lucky to have that. And if you do that as a promotion, then, you're going to be well off.
I'm a little old school in that I get excited when I see promotions are still running on television, no matter if it's a Diginet, cable access, or whatever. In Pittsburgh, are there local promotions that still utilize traditional television?
Yes. Regular television, I'm sorry, I missed that part. No, there really isn't anybody. There was a, like IWC in its early days, where there was still is a radio personality, Bubba the Bulldog. He was one of the original owners of IWC, International Wrestling Cartel. And they had a TV contract. Back in the day, PWX out of McKeesport, they had a local cable outlet, but nobody's spending that kind of money anymore to be on television when you can have there are streaming organizations. Sidekick Media, Michael Sorg is a guy locally, and he's traveled throughout the country with a team, and they have the streaming capabilities of some of the wrestling organizations in and around Pittsburgh, as well as I've seen throughout the country. So those are, some of the leaders in streaming that we see.
So we want to say we heard it here first. So are there some talents that have not yet broken out, maybe on a bigger stage, that you want to highlight here and that we should go look for in the world of streaming and YouTube?
Streaming and YouTube, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know. Like I said, go to Sidekick Media. You can see, that's a Pittsburgh-based organization. You can see some of the shows that they promote, and that's the one that I know of here in the Pittsburgh region. Michael Sorg is a great guy. He has a lot of product. You can check that out, and go to some of the. I think that he does. If there's anybody that does anything streaming here, I think you would have to go through him. I think he does all of those. Like the KSWA, we always never really did that because we always emphasized buying a ticket, a inexpensive ticket, and come and see it live. That's what we always championed.
Is there a male or female wrestler that you think someone should go out of their way to find either video or to come and buy a ticket to see because they're going to break out on the big scene soon?
One of my favorites is Beastman. You've seen him maybe even on the NWA. He is a guy that's been around for a long time. Great gimmick, great athlete. He has a great attitude. Check out Beastman. One of my favorites in the KSWA was a guy named Harley T. Morris. He really started, he's still only in his early 30s. He started, about 10 years ago. And I've never seen anybody like him before, where he can just stand there and generate heat. People will boo him and call him Barbie, and because he has the bleach blonde hair, and it works out well. That is a guy I've never seen anybody like him before anywhere, where he just generates heat by standing there. Those are two of my favorites.
Thanks. Let me turn over to John.
So, Tom, where can everybody find and follow you as far as social media and anything else you've got going on?
Well, you could always find I'm still at KSWA Trapper on Twitter. I'm always going to call it Twitter. You can go to KSWA Wrestling, find me there. KSWA Digest is the wrestling blog that I have about wrestling in Pittsburgh. I'm probably not going to write a ton more about wrestling because, I'm not going to be working in it primarily anymore. Maybe some historical pieces. If somebody asks me to do something and I agree to it, we'll see about that. But, I do a lot of mainstream writing as well. Like I said, you could see my name here, but sometimes the liturgy is difficult for people to find to spell. So they always forget the second E. So that you can find me on Facebook and all the socials that way.
All right, Tom, thank you so much for all the time today. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys reaching out. The article that I put out there, I wanted to put out. Loyalty is the number one thing for me. I've been loyal to the KSWA for 20 years. They've been loyal to Pittsburgh for 25. But now that we're over, I wanted to help put over some of my friends at some of these other organizations, IWC, RISE, RWA, some of these great organizations that have been around for a long time. So I appreciate you guys reaching out to me.
Thanks, Tom. Looking forward to next time.
All right. Thank you, guys. Anytime. Have a good one.
Tom. You too. All right, Lavie, let's get to the news. You want to talk about Titan Towers?
Yeah.
What in the world?
John, I don't know if you took a peek at the news that we put together, but we're talking about almost things that we never talk about. So we're going to have some fun here.
All right, yeah.
So this, came across in my alerts. It was kind of an interesting story when it first came out. Titan Towers was going to be sold and built into apartment complexes, and that's still the plan. So I wanted to give an update on that. MB Financial's plan is to do away with about 2/3 of the office buildings parking and create 1, 2, and 3-bedroom apartments along with extensive amenity spaces, including a large outdoor pool. Now, John, I'm not meaning to cause trouble, but wouldn't this be like a historic site? Maybe some people in Stamford want to look into historic preservation, right? You can't chop up Titan Towers. I know if you go to the inside, that's one thing, but that's crazy. The 6 affordable units would be priced to tenants earning up to half of the region's average median income. So, reduced rent apartments. So you can get a family of 3 in there for $1,462, but it would be difficult to do so with the lottery and so on. An MB Financial unit bought the building for $3.75 million last Christmas, according to city records. It has stood vacant since, but it's planned to be completed as early as mid-2027. So, John, I don't know if I told you this, but a few years ago, we spent the weekend in Stamford just to see is this a good place for our family and whatever? And we had no issues with it, but ultimately we didn't move there, of course. But I don't know, 2027. Could you imagine living in Titan Towers? That'd be crazy.
Yeah. Oh my God, that would be pretty cool, actually.
I guess they would have to spruce it up around it, which they probably will, right? Because it was kind of like an office park, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes.
but I'm sure, with what they're spending and the time they're done, it'll be quite the place. So looking forward to continuing to follow that.
What is going on? Speaking of WWE, what is going on at NXT right now?
Yeah, so just a little bit of a look back, because I don't think we had a chance to kind of close the loop on some of their most recent shows, but then a look ahead, because the first time and second time, maybe third time we saw it, we're sort of like, will they continue doing these shows on the road? And it seems to be working. And basically, Brendan Thurston was like, if it wasn't profitable, they probably wouldn't be doing it. I don't think it's like completely developmental. So, I mean, when you have talent under contract, you might like say, okay, well, that's a cost anyway. We're allowed to have them wrestle a certain amount of dates a year and then put them on the road. So how's it going? It seems like it's going okay at the moment. So NXT deadline, so that's more of a PLE, but 1,982 tickets on December 6th in the Boeing Center in San Antonio. When they were on the road a little bit after that in Greensboro, North Carolina, that show did about 1,489, according to WrestleTix. Township Auditorium, Columbia, South Carolina. That reminds me of watching WCW Saturday Night or something like that. And we'll be here on Township Auditorium, which is great to see because you don't often hear WWE in that venue, of course. And this is another opportunity to do that. So as of the last count, I don't think WrestleTix closed off these counts in a final accounting, but it was less than 1,000 tickets there in a small setup in a larger venue. Macon City Auditorium in Macon, Georgia. That show, there wasn't a final counting, 776. So maybe they weren't doing that great now that I look at it. But whatever's going on, it seems to be working for them. Nashville and Knoxville, Knoxville 1st, 29th and 30th. Knoxville Civic Coliseum and the Pinnacle. And then Atlanta area, February 24th, Center Stage, so not a surprise there, but Kennewick, Washington, February 13th, Toyota Center. So more on the road. John, in terms of distribution, one of the things I was thinking about, was with Peacock not necessarily keeping the PLEs and WWE's library migrating somewhere. The PLEs would seem to make a lot of sense for me just on the CW, right? Like as specials. I think having a whole nother night of wrestling would be too much for the CW, and it didn't really make sense to have TNA if you're not going to have NXT on the CW, but just having the occasional PLE Clash of the Champions type thing would make a lot of sense to me. What do you think, John?
Not a bad idea at all. Might as well kind of do that, and obviously that would help out the CW. The next time around, they want to do more deals with NXT and maybe get some more money because you could put in some bigger shows there. So good idea.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, I credit myself for bringing NXT to the CW by tagging Brad Schwartz on LinkedIn,
yes,
and suggesting that they have wrestling on it. So a Barry Horowitz move for me, the pat on the back.
Now, what is going on with Cyberfight, Bushiroad, and the rest of the Japanese financials?
Yeah, so Bushiroad's financials have been out for a month and somewhat talked about, but I just thought that A, we didn't talk about it, but B, now that we have a little bit of Cyberfight's financials, it's worth coming back to and so on. So Cyberfight had been losing money, and they still are, but they're losing less money. Fiscal, and in Japan, the fiscal year is a little bit different, but 2022, $4.55 million loss. 2023, $0.69 million loss. 2024, $1.41 million loss. But now they're almost profitable, $0.09 million loss. In yen, that was, 14 million yen. So they're really nearly there, here or there, in terms of a purchase. Now, John, I haven't been following the creative much, but people are attributing to the Ozawa effect. Are you familiar with Ozawa?
Ozawa, no.
Okay, so yeah, the Pro Wrestling Noah's Archive, who seems to be following this, of course, closely, attributed this to the Osawa effect. So I have to, I guess we both have to educate
Yeah.
ourselves and see what that's all about. Because if it turns profitable, I think that's a pretty interesting thing. Because as we've talked about many times, Cyber Agent, the parent company, they're sort of like the sleeping giant in the industry, right? They did all these acquisitions of wrestling. They have a distribution streaming platform, but beyond that, of course, they were investing because they didn't give up and they lost almost or a little bit more than $4.5 million a year. And then you total that up over all these years, how much they may have lost. But the company overall made a profit of $478 million this year. Let's say they wanted to invest more in pro wrestling in a serious way, they could be a major player. I mean, they already are a player, but just imagine the possibilities there. So something to think about. Now that was their total year. So Bushiroad, they just covered their quarterly amounts, and they have a presentation material that usually accompanies their quarterly report. So just wanted to cover some of those elements that were in there. And I don't know why they call it 2026 yet. Again, in Japan it's different, but as they say, in fiscal year 26 third quarter, so it's like in the future, Tokyo Dome tournament was held on January 4th, 2026, featuring Tanahashi's retirement match and Iron Wolf's debut match. So I'm not sure why they talked about it in the past tense, but maybe that's a translation thing. But advance tickets have already surpassed 31,548. That was a month ago. From what I understand now, John, it's completely sold out. I'm not sure what that total is and what the setups are, but obviously a great success. Hard to know though, if that is going to help you for the future, right? Obviously on a much smaller example, Memphis Wrestling, Memphis Memories, right? In the early to mid 90s, when you would do those shows once a year, you can get a huge crowd to the Mid-South Coliseum, whereas regular weeks would be less than 1,000. So just something to think about. So for Dream Queen show, they report Dream Queendom Show 2025. Tickets are selling at a pace that surpasses previous Stardom events held at Raiguku. I'm not going to try and pronounce the whole thing, mess it up, but the place. Stardom announces business partnership with CMLL, which was reported on at the time. Okay, so there's a bar chart here in terms of their net sales in the quarter. 1,483 million yen, up 22 million yen compared, I guess, to the previous quarter. Looks like it's holding up pretty well. What else? New Japan held summer tournaments. Stardom held summer tournaments such as the 5-Star, with Kanemoto serving as a regular on the TV program. Women's wrestling was broadcast live for the first time in 23 years. Let's see, what else? An interesting element is they have something that they're focusing on called IP developer, intellectual property that they're hoping to maximize more revenue. So for their sports unit, which is basically just New Japan and Stardom now, I'm not sure what happened with their kickboxing and shoot boxing type endeavors in the last few years, but what are they trying to maximize with their IP? Pro wrestling shows, pro wrestling films, production and distribution of content, and professional wrestling goods, planning, and sales.
So how about, you're talking obviously the Japanese wrestling scene. What about the British wrestling scene, which we never talk about on this show?
Yeah, so thanks to Romy Glazer, who's the first person to share the article with me, and then later, a day or two later, I got it in my Google News alerts, and it was a little bit on X floating around. But wrestling execs to pin down £5 million funding for Project Fight Launch. Ben Webb, a British pro wrestler, is working with Oakwell Advisory on plans for a revamped European series that would aim to capitalize on the interest from millions of British fans. A British professional wrestlers in talks with potential backers to secure millions of pounds in funding. Sky News has learned that Ben Webb, who participated in the WWE's franchise under the name Trent 7, is working with advisors to raise that amount to build Project Fight into Europe's #1 televised wrestling brand. Webb has enlisted Oakwell, the sports advisory firm, which is all working on efforts to attract private capital into British cycling, to advise on the fundraising and the development of the new product. The Project Fight team is said to have had discussions with Sunset and Vine, the production company, and Paramount, the owner of Channel 5 in the UK. I don't know. I didn't have a chance to look if that's Paramount, about collaborating on the new venture. Talks with prospective investors are understood to have been underway for weeks. If successfully secured, the new funding would be raised at a pre-money valuation of roughly £10 million. The capital would also allow Project Fight to break even in its third year, according to its architects. Mr. Webb said the project's ambition was to transform the UK and European professional wrestling landscape and create a business valued at over £100 million over the next 5 years. It comes amid a burgeoning interest in wrestling among international fans. Talking about WWE on Netflix, AEW. Research suggests that up to 6 million people in Britain alone consider themselves to be wrestling enthusiasts, with Project Fight aiming to tap into that base and bridge that gap between diehard and casuals. I built a company from a disused scout hut with 40 friends and family in the crowd and grew it organically to thousands at the NEC all over the UK, Japan, Mexico, USA, and the world, and it helped change the landscape of British wrestling, Mr. Webb told the news. I'm not sure what that means. Is Trent Seven a promoter already? I'm trying to understand, John, help me translate from British to English here. I built a company from a disused scout hut.
I have no idea. It must be a British thing. I have no clue.
Somebody help us out. I mean, we can go to Grok or whatever later, but and he's claiming that he has shows all over these different places. So, okay. So I think that covers it, but actually there's a little bit more here on the business side. So Project Fight's advisory board includes Roger Draper, former chief executive of Sports England and the Lawn Tennis Association, and Peter Angel, the CEO of Sunset and Vine. The venture is also formulating a broader content distribution strategy aimed at utilizing wrestling's existing social media followers and content sharing partnerships with major wrestling adjacent influencers. Mr. Webb said the Project Fight would have a gender balanced roster, including females from all over the world. The roster of wrestlers being lined up is said to have a combined social media following of more than 12 million. Okay, so one wrestler that's been on WWE, right? Like you get a ton of followers. So a premium pilot event is expected to take place next year, depending on the successful completion of the fundraising. People always say, like, if a wrestling show needs a pilot, like their prospects aren't great. I'm not dimming it here, but John, this sounds very, very ambitious with a lot of different connections. What do you think of it all?
I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, like the pilot and everything. Sometimes I feel like it almost sounds like they know it's not going to happen. That kind of thing. But I'm hoping, I'm wishful.
Yeah, it's kind of like that thing where either something from America translates well across the world, and that internationalness of it, like it seems larger than life, but when you try and do it locally, like it doesn't work out as well, or other things that translate. Even, and I know it's a lot more popular now, but like even Major League Soccer being like, there's so many international fans here, and there's so many youth that play soccer. It's going to be huge, but 30 years on, obviously it's grown a lot, and they have their own stadiums. It's still not like, a huge thing. And compare that to the WNBA, which has just been like, finally, a big success.
Now, you talked about Japan, talked about England. What about India? What's going on with maybe a little GLW? And what about India wrestling?
Yeah, John, you remember when we were like talking about it a few months ago, like maybe the biggest media deal that you haven't heard of? So now I got curious. So I was like, what's going on? So first, a little bit of summary from Grok, and then we'll get into a specific article. GLW announced in August 2025 as a partnership between Praiser Bharati and AX Sports, part of UK-based Adi Group, was planned to launch with an official unveiling on September 17th and broadcast starting October 4th on DD Sports, with streaming on Waves and radio via All India Radio. It was promoted as India's first major wrestling entertainment league, featuring great family scripted storylines, Indian culture, and the great Kali, of course. However, as of December 18th, there's no evidence that GLW launched or made it to TV in India. No reports confirm any unveiling in September, broadcast in October, November, or ongoing season. Instead, articles from November indicate that AX Sports and Preza Bharati dropped the GLW concept after reviewing proposals. These sources described GLW referred to as an Australian-originated or West first idea, and that was, it was rumored that the promoter came from Australia, who's already involved in the business, a former guest of the show, as outdated and mismatched for India's market, with the partnership shifting to a new, more Bharat first homegrown wrestling entertainment product. So rather than speculate on that, let's get into this article, which was actually posted a number of places on the ANI PR wire. I'm not sure if that's like, the AP in India. But Adi Group and AX Sports to ignite India's sports entertainment revolution with a power-packed Bharat first approach in partnership with Preza Bharati. AX Sport, the flagship sports entertainment platform of London-based Adi Group, in collaboration with India's Bharati, are charging ahead with fire in their stride. They have greenlit an out-of-the-box, eye-catching Indian storyline that fuses Bharat's rich entertainment and cultural heritage with the raw power of wrestling and the nation's rising spirit of nationalism, pride, equanimity, and valor. This is not just a refresh. It is a reinvention. A person closely associated with one of the content providers revealed that this is a high-impact Bharat first vision designed to resonate deeply, inspire passionately, and dominate the Indian sports entertainment landscape to satisfy the world's largest and pickiest millennial and Gen Z demographic with a compelling storyline that could truly capture the pulse of Indian audiences for multiple seasons. They also claim it has the support of grassroots spaces, in-depth outreach to organizations across urban, semi-urban, and rural India. The companies have also been evaluating for several months a proposal from Australian-originated GLW for this upcoming India-centric sports content. Sources reveal that a rigorous review fueled by in-depth market research and direct stakeholder consultations exposed critical gaps. Its outdated West-first legacy-driven approach was simply out of touch with the dynamics, evolving demands of Indians' sports and entertainment ecosystem. Sports say these persons have officially dropped GLW despite the aggressive pitching, as its out-of-touch proposal has no place in the evolving landscape. They're said to be doubling down on its new property's identity as a proudly homegrown powerhouse, crafting content that reflects India's realities, celebrates its athletic grit, and meets sky-high viewer expectations every day for 40 weeks. Okay, so as I understand, the shell of the concept is there. You have the media people and the platforms to do it. But, what concerns me is like the core of it, the people that were actually going to deliver the product have been rejected because it's not, I guess you could say sort of like a play on words here, like Indian wrestling for Indians. And I understand that, in terms of not necessarily their particular needs, but maybe culturally where it just like it doesn't fit. And there's certain storylines, right, where like you make a movie and it looks fine in our eyes, and then sort of like it goes to another country and they're like, this is offensive, or it's not from our perspective, and so on. So like they're really trying to gear it towards that market. So John, I think the British market was hard to predict. I think maybe the Indian market is even harder to predict. What do you think about this one's chances?
Yeah, I don't know about this, especially if it didn't happen already. It was supposed to happen. I doubt it.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? Like you have a date, whatever, and then you like hold it up and you're like, suddenly you have an issue with the type of product, that it is.
What's going on with NWA right now? What's going on with you guys over there?
Yeah, so I always enjoy like the local articles that focus on the distribution when they run a show and PBS and so on. So just going to touch upon one of those via Tampa Bay 28. NWA returns to its roots as Tampa becomes home base for new era of wrestling. I think that's been announced a number of times, but there was a new article. Corgan is working to bring the NWA back to prominence at EDU Studios. The ring is in place, chairs are set, and cameras are rolling as the new stars of the NWA prepare for their matches. Tampa's connection to pro wrestling goes many years with the NWA and so on. At WEDU, the ring, okay, it's caffeine and a circus. J.R. Kratos joked backstage as performers went through last-minute plans. The circus ringmaster is Billy Corgan. You have been doing this now for a while. How do you balance it all? You have a band too. I have a band. I have 3 young children. I have a third one on the way. Wait, I have 3 young children. I have a third one on the way. Okay, so a little bit confusing there. I started a podcast working with Bill Maher's new podcast network. It's a lot to take on, but I love it. I'm very passionate about it. And bringing back the NWA is something I really hold dear to my heart. I'm not sure I can do it, but there are days I really feel challenged by it. I really feel there's an opportunity. I think recently WWE sale for over $9 billion. I think you see that wrestling in many ways is about to have its biggest era. That is the cool thing about the NWA and what Billy's brought back. There are people that work with us here in Tampa that say, I remember going there, and this is where I went on dates before I got married to my wife. My grandfather took me here. I saw Dusty Rhodes here. This is Brian Idol talking. Corgan's hands-on and so on. So kind of the article that you expect from Billy Corgan, kind of course, connected to the past with the NWA and his passions, aspirational, but talking about like the bigger business. But I think, John, the NWA, I think one of the important things is that it's still around, right? And they got the streaming platform deals and so on, but it's kind of been spinning its wheels for a while. And obviously, the bottom line is if it makes sense to Billy Corgan, then it makes sense to keep going, but they haven't necessarily grown very much.
Very true. Well said. What about Westside Gunn? Speaking of, maybe spinning the wheels in the wrestling business, what's going on with him?
Yeah, so many of us have had our WWE moments where maybe we return later, but for me, it was Katie Vick storyline where I was just like, I can't, deal with this stuff anymore. And for Westside Gunn, for WWE, it was being kicked out of an event. So he is no longer doing wrestling-themed albums. John, I was actually walking near Times Square, maybe on the edges of Times Square, and there was a huge $1 Million Man Westside Gunn album poster, like a whole building. And I was like, if only Virgil were alive today, his table would be set up, right there. So obviously somebody that loves wrestling was willing to invest and so on, but they kind of ruined his love for it a little bit on the WWE side. So one of the biggest breakups managed to slip under nearly everyone's radar, the split between Westside Gunn and WWE. After spending years tying his brand, imagery, and larger-than-life personality to wrestling, the Buffalo icon had a tense altercation at a WWE event, one that ultimately resulted in a cease and desist order. Oh, I didn't know that. In response, Gunn publicly vowed to move forward without the wrestling branding that has become such a defining part of his aesthetic. His first official step in this new era comes in the form of My Saucony's Glowin', a tight 3-track EP that wastes no time reminding listeners why Westside remains one of the most eclectic curators in rap. So I'm not going to get into why the record works because that's beyond our takes, but just notable in that way. But I was like, let me look up, has that dimmed his love of the pro wrestling industry? So his promotion, Fourth Rope, or Heels Have Eyes, a little bit confusing to me which is which, but they were at Art Basel, which of course Sukiban was as well, although Sukiban got all of the press for being there. They were at WrestleCade, which is a smart move. So attaching themselves to events that are either wrestling friendly or wrestling centric. And what's next? That the plan was to have season 2 kick off in LA in 2026, but nothing on the board yet. So just interesting to see if his passion continues. Obviously, he's been at AEW and other shows like that, so more connected to the independent wrestling scene. And I wonder if that was part of the friction, if it had anything to do with working with other promotions, whereas WWE may only want to spotlight and accommodate him if he is fully on board with them.
And finally, DAZN. What's the latest?
Yeah, so just a little bit of speculation. I think DAZN has, of course, done deals with pro wrestling companies before, like TNA, and some of them may still be ongoing, but they haven't really created a huge footprint in the U.S. Some attempts at that. So they're in talks actually to buy to buy what had been, basically the Sinclair RSN. So that keeps coming back. Main Street Sports Group. But to me, a smart move, especially since they're so combat sports centric, at least here, is to bid on both UFC Fight Pass and the WWE library that's coming off Peacock. That would just make a lot of sense to me from, of course, an outsider looking in. So just a little bit of food for thought.
All right, let's wrap this bad boy up and head towards the plugs. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. How about you, Lavie?
Follow me on X at Lavie Marg, LAVIE-MARG, and check out our Business of the Business LinkedIn group. We want to get to 150 members soon.
Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. We'll see you right back here next week for a little Business of the Business. See you next week, folks.